Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. We continue to unpack that address by the President yesterday, and one of the areas that were very important was the allocation of monies to municipalities. Let's now talk to Mr. Cheng Tseng. He's a specialist at the Financial Fiscal Commission. Now, the Financial Fiscal Commission was set up to make recommendations to Parliament, provincial legislatures, and organised local government and other organs of state on financial and fiscal matters as envisaged in the Constitution and other national legislation. Let's welcome you to our conversation, Mr. Tseng. Your overall impressions about the delivery yesterday by the President?
Yes, I thought the delivery by the President yesterday was substantive, just targeted and well planned. Specifically around the 500 billion social relief and economic support grant or package, which is divided into 4 parts, particularly around health and the relief for hunger and social distress, support for companies and workers, and even considering the reopening of the economy. And each of those parts has specific shall we say, line item financial supports deliberately put in place to speak to those objectives. So I thought it was very well planned. The implementation part of it obviously will take the continuous and heightened vigilance around the dissemination, the transfer, and to ensure that there aren't any fiscal leakages that at South Africa we have been struggling even before the time. But facing this crisis, the way that how this sort of impact on us and how quickly it came about, I thought it was a very well thought out plan.
So he announced 500 billion rand, of which he said 130 billion will be taken from the reprioritization of activities within the current budget, and the rest of it will be funding from different institutions. If you were to get the chance to advise the President on how to go about securing this funding, what would you say?
I think, as with most or all financial or fiscal, shall we say, negotiation or bargaining that takes place, honesty is the best way to approach this. Let's be honest about what it means for the financial and fiscal sector, what it means for the economy, domestically as well as globally. This is something that impacts all of the economies, right? From the US to Germany to UK and many of the European, as well as developing countries around the world. And we've seen the numbers coming out, obviously, from China and some of the other economies. Let's be honest, what kind of crisis, the global crisis that we're facing. And to negotiate in terms of the rates, because as with all financial instruments, it comes with a cost, and there is also an added consideration that needs to be in place to talk about honestly and directly, straightforwardly, the rates. The interest rate margins on these loans and in direct injections, if you like. So that's how I would suggest. And just don't be scared to point out some of the pitfalls in some of these some of these financial injections. So, for example. There is a serious consideration that needs to think about when we say financial, or what is we call it in economics, nominal injections versus real injection. So that means basically that yes, we can release a lot of money But at the same time, it's what it's done to the real economy, the activities of the economy. And this obviously has to do with what this 500 billion will do, not just in terms of the money figure, but also in terms of people's behavior. If people can't go outside, can't trade, can't go to school and receive services or get services, then money is still just money at the end of the day. It's just paper. So it's those conversations very difficult, but it's time to get real and just talk directly to how much is it going to cost us, how we're going to do it, how we're going to fund it, and how we're going to spend it effectively, efficiently, and without leakages.
So the Financial and Fiscal Commission has previously released reports on activities within the local government space, in this case, municipalities. What are your thoughts about the 20 billion that's been allocated to this space? And are you confident it will reach the intended beneficiaries?
I think, as with most all government implementation, I think a constant vigilance and even a heightened vigilance. I mean, if we look at the local government's Auditor General's reports, there are lots of irregularities, errors being made in municipalities, in the local municipal sphere, notwithstanding some of the interferences, especially around procurement. So in that space, it's really about that monitoring and evaluation and that constant vigilance, and to do constant measuring of when you put down this tranche of money, what do I get out from the other side in terms of output to outcome? That direct measure is quite lacking in the sphere, and not just local municipal sphere, but also at the provincial level. And why is that? Why have we been struggling with it? Part of it is to do with capacity. And the way that some of these local municipalities just don't have the some of the capabilities, personnel, perhaps, but at the end of the day, it's about what people do. So yes, this injection, the nail in the coffin is that yes, 20 billion, but what do we get out? It's the same. It goes for anything else that we do really with money, right? 20 billion to the healthcare or health treatment, equipment for health workers, community screening, more testing, and so on. It's how many beds do we get? How many ventilators do we get? Medicine staffing with the 20 billion. And that thing is something that to do it properly, to implement it properly, it's always about monitoring and evaluation.
So the municipality injection funding is going towards things like water supply and sanitation, public transport, food and shelter for the homeless. How do we separate providing for requirements for the COVID-19 outbreak and your usual run-of-the-mill municipal requirements?
Yeah, so this has to do to broaden this topic. Is actually with COVID-19, the nature of it. We really have to recognize that it's an infectious disease, meaning that the screening, testing, and the quarantine of this disease is of paramount importance. And it actually means that if we don't have that down, the tracking, testing, and so on, reopening the economy will always put us at risk of a second wave or another explosion or a explosion. And that's why we talk about the exponential curve, right? After the initial tapering. that we are seeing now, thanks to our early intervention. But to separate things, it's always first that identification, right? So in terms of municipal services and if I dare say, even about the topic about reopening the economy, how to open the economy, and to address all the other negative, substantive negative devastation on our economy, all the sacrifices we make. Two, obviously, to flatten the curve, to save lives, basically. All hinges on whether we can do the screening, the testing, to identify these patients, those who are the disease, and then to quarantine, to treat, to save lives there. I think the worst scenario, I'm sorry to move on a bit to the opening of the economy question, is that if we don't have a well-placed, really like what the Germans have done, to test, track, quarantine, and isolate, and basically keep the keep the disease off the streets.
Yeah.
The streets can't be open.
All right, we have to wrap up our conversation, but just a quick one. How's the FFC interacting with government in the fight against COVID-19?
Yeah, so we're having a conversation and obviously thinking about what does this mean, the COVID-19 mean for the macroeconomic and the fiscal framework, how it has impacted on the budget specifically. So in the division of revenue, how the money will be split and reprioritized is the key, and reorganized within the states, and also obviously also externally from if we are getting foreign support. And that has to do a lot with our modeling and that we are currently running to see what the debt situation would look like, what the fiscal situation would look like, what the sustainability risks and the financial risks involved in this. So we're looking at this from a data evidence-based, because faced with any crisis, the first thing is we have to remain calm and think about things rationally, and see what we are dealing with here before we act or rather rationally forbid.
Cheng Tseng, thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Cheng Tseng is with the Financial Fiscal Commission. Let's take a